Welcome everybody. In this movie I'm gonna talk about openings for Germany. Germany is one of the central and maybe the most central country in the diplomacy game. It starts with 3 home supply centers in Munich, which is only bordered by land, and with Kiel and Berlin, which are both surrounded by both land and seas. Germany has quite a few neighbors. It has England, it has France. Together, the 3 of them form the northern cycle or the northern triangle. But you also have Russia in the east, which is a direct neighbor. You have Silesia and Prussia over here. You have Sweden, which you're going to have some interaction about. And then there's Austria, which I consider to be your natural ally. And there's Italy, which is your least important neighbor. Basically, only Turkey on the very short term is not so interesting to you. Although, obviously, Turkey is a common neighbor of both Russia and Austria. So, how to handle this? Well, first of all, I hope your first diplomacy game you have not drawn or taken or got assigned Germany, because it's quite a heavy job to play Germany. You're going to be talking to everybody, and you need to have an overall view on the game. If you play, for instance, England, or if you play Turkey, you can you can focus on your local area, only on your direct neighbors. But as Germany, as all the players on the board are your direct neighbors, basically, you need to have an overall view on the game. Now, in terms of 19-1, you have 3 neutral supply centers that you could take: Denmark in the north, and Holland and Belgium in the west. However, also entering Burgundy and perhaps grabbing a French neutral supply center, taking Sweden, or even going to Warsaw, which is not very common, but it happens, are possibilities. Entering Tyrol as Germany, Tyrolia is not something I would recommend, but it's definitely also a possibility. So let's start with your unit in Kiel. That's your fleet. You basically have 2 options for that one if you're not doing something very strange. You either go to Denmark in the north, or you go to Holland in the west. Now, the advantage of Denmark is that in fall 19-1, you could bounce Russia out of Sweden. So Russia will 9 out of 10 times move to the Gulf of Bothnia to conquer Sweden in fall 19-1, and hence grab a neutral supply center. If you are in Denmark, you can always decide to move to Sweden. So Denmark is directly bordering Sweden, as you can see, and hence deny the Russians a build. Whether you want that will depend partially on how Austria and Russia get along, and also what do you think in general of the situation of Russia. A quick death of Russia can be beneficial for the Germans, but not necessarily. It depends on who grabs those gains. Especially if a country like Turkey or England would grab the bulk of the Russian supply centers, I would not be so happy as Germany, because you're next. Okay, so that's Denmark. What if you go to Holland? Well, the big advantage of going to Holland is that you're already in a neutral supply center, and you can use the unit in Holland to support your army in the fall to Belgium. So this is quite a common opening, let's say. I'm just putting some moves for the French here as well, and resolve for a moment. So this could be the situation after spring 19-1. Your fleet is in Holland and your army is in Ruhr. You could move your army Ruhr and have your fleet in Holland support that move, which basically means that a single attack from the French on Belgium is unsuccessful and you take Belgium. At the same time, you have to move your army from Berlin to Kiel to grab Denmark. So that's basically around your fleet. Now, let's go back to another map and let's have a look at your army in Munich. Now, your army in Munich has many options. Many options. You can go to Ruhr, which is quite neutral. If you move to Ruhr, you're probably in the game to take Belgium, which is probably also what the French will expect. You could also make an attack on France by going to Burgundy. But you can also hold the unit, even move it to Kiel, which is quite rare, or you could move it to Silesia in the east. What you also have to be aware of that there's quite a few countries that can actually conquer Munich in 19-1. The French can, the Austrians can, not so likely, the Austrians have plenty of problems on their own, and also the Italians can, which happens sometimes as well. The Italians will have to move to Tyrolia, so you will see it coming, but still, it can happen. So you have to do some diplomacy there, because you cannot technically defend against all these countries simultaneously. You You could agree on a bounce with France. I tend to think that that's a little more beneficial for France than for Germany, because France will bounce you with army Marseille. Your army in Munich is then stuck in the fall turn, whereas Marseille can still grab Spain. So could be an okay idea, but it's quite defensive. Austria, you don't have much to worry from Austria. Austria is your natural ally. He doesn't just speak German. He has so many problems as a central country on the Balkans that he will very unlikely to be moving to Bohemia or Tyrolia. Italy is a bit different. So be aware of an Italian move to Tyrolia. He could tell you that it is to attack Austria, but he could also just be walking into Munich. So, yeah, the option to Ruhr is the neutral move. The option into Burgundy depends on what you agree with the French. The option to Silesia is probably something the Russian won't like, unless you agreed on a bounce with Army Warsaw or something, but that's quite unlikely. Well, then the last one, your army in Berlin. Your army in Berlin has very few options. You could either move to Prussia or Silesia, or you just move it to Kiel to capture Denmark or Holland in the fall. So that's quite easy. Now let's have a look at some of your neighbors. And let's have a look at some of these neutral supply centers. Let's look at a situation where Russia is anti-Austrian, but you really want to keep Austria alive because he's a good friend of you. Now what you would do in that case is Germany, you move your fleet to Denmark. And you tell the Russian in advance that you're moving your fleet to Denmark. Now, why would you tell your moves to the Russian in advance if you're not fully trusting him? Well, you threaten Russia, if you move to Galicia with your army in Warsaw, I will bounce you out of Sweden in the fall. Now, that's quite a strong tactical move because Russia needs to act first and you can deliver later. So, Russia needs to do something in spring 01 and you will have to do something for him in fall 01. So, you can always decide in fall 01 what you really want. It's definitely not a strategy that will gain you any supply centers directly, but it will give Austria a higher probability of survival, which is probably in your best interest as Germany as well. Secondly, you need to talk with France. France is your direct neighbor. You need to talk about Belgium. Usually also England has an interest in Belgium. And you need to talk about Burgundy. Now, the French will never like a German army in Burgundy, and I would say entering Burgundy in spring 1901 is basically a declaration of war to the French, and it will be very hard to restore that trust later. So if you do it all the way. I see quite a few players actually moving to Burgundy and then in the fall moving to Belgium. Now, that might get you Belgium, but it will get you a very distrustful neighbor. In general, I believe Germany should take 2 or maybe 3 supply centers, neutral supply centers in 1901. Germany is a central country, it needs those 2 builds, which are usually Denmark and Holland. In case you get a 3rd build, which could be the case in Belgium, as I just showed you, be aware of the psychological effects. So if Russia also has 6, it's not such a problem, but if you are the only country with 6 supply centers on the board, you might invite England and France to start working together against the big, scary German. Now, Germany is not that scary with 6 supply centers because actually it's kind of what he needs to defend himself on all sides. But it depends a little bit on the psychology on how you explain your 6 supply centers, whether countries will buy that. Now, England. What do you want England to do as Germany? I think what you want England to do is, well, not to attack you, and that's basically the only thing. So England either has the option to go north or to go south, and south meaning into the English Channel. Now, in general, you would love a bounce on the Channel, because then these 2 countries are in conflict, England and France. They're your direct neighbors, so you can only benefit from that. But play your cards well, because after the Juggernaut, which is a Russian-Turkey alliance, also the French-English alliance going from west to east, so from left to right on the map, is quite powerful. It's not as powerful as the Juggernaut. I would say that is significantly stronger, but it's still quite powerful. So it's your job to make sure that they're not cooperating. Now that's basically it. Be aware that as Germany, there's no like technical or let's say moving units kind of way that you can make a perfect opening. The perfect opening will involve a significant amount of diplomacy, and that's mainly due to your central function on the board. There's one last opening that I want to show you playing Germany. It's very uncommon, so I would not recommend you to do it in your first or second game, but it is quite a nice one. And it will definitely surprise a lot of people on the board. Now the idea is, It's called, well, let's say the Anti-Russian opening, but that's quite obvious. But you could also call it something like Operation Barbarossa for the history fans. Check out 1942. So in this opening, you basically move east and north, which is kind of counterintuitive because your main neutral supply centers are here in the west. And France and England, your direct neighbors, but also your direct threats, they're also in the west. But you tend to ignore that. You hope for some kind of British-French conflict, that they're a bit distracted by themselves, and you move everything east. So you move your fleet to Denmark with the objective of bouncing Russia out of Sweden. And next to that, you move both your armies east. So you move Munich to Silesia and Berlin to Prussia. Now you have a very good shot at capturing Warsaw in fall 1901, because Russia might have done something like this. So if I resolve this very quickly and we have a look, now here you will create a bounce in fall 1901 in Sweden. And here you have to take a guess. Russia could defend with all its units Warsaw, but he could also be just, let's say, going for one neutral supply center and leave Warsaw to you. You could even preempt on that by just moving one unit to Warsaw and moving Prussia directly to Livonia to get an even stronger position in spring 1902. But hey, that's all a matter of guessing. What's the downside of this? The downside is primarily on your west flank. So your west flank is super open. England would have entered the North Sea. The French, in the best case, have only entered Picardy, but worst case, they have entered Burgundy, which means it threatens Munich. So it's a high risk option, but the rewards could be quite high because you could have killed Russia basically in 3 or 4 seasons. Austria will be very grateful. And it creates tremendous opportunity in, let's say, this part of the map, including Scandinavia. Usually your next step after this opening and having, let's say, limped Russia is also to be anti-English. So I would make sure I have some confidence in the French player in this case. Not something I recommend though for the first seasons, for your first few games. For your first few games, please do something like this where you try to capture Holland and Denmark and be a bit protective over Munich. There are quite a few German players that lose Munich in spring in 1901, and they usually don't end up so well. So please take care of that. I hope you enjoyed this. See you next time.